Okay.
Houston Astros cheating.
They cheated, they lied.
2017.
Yes.
Hi, welcome back. How you doing?
Missed you.
Yeah.
Sat next to her dad.
Wow. Hi, Mick. How you doing? It's great to see you, dear. It's really good to see you. All right. Good morning, everyone. Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos. Good morning. Good Shabbos. Welcome back. Nice to see everybody. Come on in. We're going to use both the Chumash and the sheet in front of you, so keep them both. Don't lose either one. Okay? Do something a little different today. So welcome back. Shabbat Shalom. Come on in. Good morning. Nice to see you all. Shabbat Shalom. Following our learning this morning, you're all invited to come and daven. There's just a service this morning. There's no bar mitzvah, just a nice service. Following that, there's lunch, chili rellenos. And then following that, we have a scholar in residence in the synagogue this weekend, Cantor Israel Rand. Cantor Rand is the chief cantor of the great synagogue of Ramat Gan. He's also worked in the great synagogue in Tel Aviv, and he worked in the Hamptons in New York. One of the great cantors of the world. Gave a concert last night. It was just really beautiful. So this morning, following shul, we'll meet back here, and we'll have a conversation with Cantor Rand. He's begun a cantorial school in Israel, trying to keep the arts of the cantor alive in the world. Good morning. So a very interesting person and a very wonderful hero of the Jewish people. So come and join that conversation. Yes, Billy?
Was that service recorded?
I don't know. Probably not, because he doesn't use microphones. One of the reasons we're doing the conversation in this room is because he's frum and he doesn't use microphones. So even if they tried to record it, I don't think it would be recorded.
Does he not use a microphone always?
Shabbos.
Just because of Shabbos?
Yeah, Shabbos, yeah.
That's what made him so good. Shabbos used it.
Did you hear it last night? Yeah? It was beautiful, yeah. Yeah, what a beautiful voice and a lovely man. So please come and enjoy a few minutes conversation with this great cantor. In January, we're doing another one of these. Cantor Jackie Mendelson, who's one of the great American cantors, will be with us for the weekend, and we'll have another opportunity to speak with one of the great cantors. This coming week, Wednesday, of course, is College of Jewish Studies. This year we're doing the great debates, the arguments and controversies that have shaped Judaism over the ages. Last week I had a wonderful session with Adam Greenwald, who's the head of the Introduction to Judaism program at the AJU, and he spoke about the great debate in Jewish life about whether we ought to welcome outsiders. It was actually really extraordinary. This week it's going to be Farkas and me. Rabbi Farkas and I will be talking about how do you talk to God. It's actually part of this Parsha. Can you argue with God and win? So we'll talk about the religious universes of the Bible. And then next week, we will welcome Professor Gail Leibowitz from the university, who's going to come and introduce the rabbinic argument, talk about Hillel and Shammai. So Wednesday night, 7 o'clock, good cookies, wonderful learning. And please come and join. We're learning how to argue as Jews. Next Friday night, a week from yesterday, is Tamarim at 6:30. Tamarim is our musical service in the Sephardic mode. It's a very beautiful service. It's led by Asher Levy, who's our artist in residence, and he does a marvelous marvelous service with instruments and the melodies of Tunisia and Syria and Egypt and Iraq. So please come and join that. 6:30. If you come early, there's this wonderful Sephardic smorgasbord. They call it meze, which is a buffet. It's wonderful. And then 6:30 we pray. Next Shabbos, I'm not going to be here. Rabbi Farkas will be teaching, and he'll be going through the Parsha, Parshas Chayei Sarah, and I'll be back the following week. Next Saturday is also the Neshama Minyan in the morning. That's my wife's beautiful musical spiritual minyan. She's the more spiritual of the Feinsteins. I'm not, yeah, as you know. Yes?
Next Shabbat, after the services, they're serving a very, very delicious dinner here. We encourage everybody to register.
Yes, there's a very beautiful a concert and a service, right? A concert and a dinner. Yeah, beautiful Persian music, and a dinner that goes with it. Really worthwhile. If you like rice, especially. It's really, really, thank you. Thank you. So a lot of things going on in Shul. Please come and make yourself at home here. And then there's all the usual stuff. Lunch and Learn will meet this week. And there's basketball on Sunday afternoon, Israeli dancing on Thursdays. You could spend your life here. I do, as a matter of fact. If you have a Chumash, it's on page 99. We're going to do something a little different this morning. You'll see what we're going to do. This morning's Torah portion is the second portion in the cycle of stories of Abraham. There's 3. Last week we met Abraham. This week is a very sophisticated meditation, a philosophical meditation on the question of what it means to be in covenant with God. What that possibly could mean. And you're going to see that there is, in this portion, an argument about the different ways in which one enters into relationship with God. So it begins with a very simple thing. Abraham was told at the end of last week that he has a covenant with God, and the symbol of that covenant is circumcision. So he's at 99 years old. He takes a sharp rock and circumcises himself. Please don't try this at home. I don't care how zealous you are. We'll get you a doctor. And he does to his son. And then, come in, please. And so the story is he's like, he's recovering, and he's sitting by the, it says the Lord appeared to him by the terebinths of Mamre. Terebinth means a tree. There's a grove of trees in this place called Mamre, and Abraham was hanging out there because it was warm, and God appears to him. And then, now what does that mean, God appears to him? Just a strange thing. And what did he see, And then it says, looking up, he saw 3 men standing there. He looks up and he sees 3 guys just standing there all of a sudden. Yeah, well, as it were, yeah. And he ran to the entrance to greet them, and he says, my lords, if it please you, do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought, bathe your feet, recline under the tree. Let me fetch the morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves, then go on. This is called hospitality. Hachnasat orchim is a big mitzvah. It's actually not just a Jewish mitzvah, it is a mitzvah of the desert. In the desert, there is a positive imperative that you welcome guests with enthusiasm. So even though this poor man is 99 years old and is recovering from surgery, he's running around fixing a meal for these guys. And as he's doing it, it becomes clear these are not ordinary travelers. These are not Fuller Brush men, right, or Avon ladies. These are angels. Now, an angel in the Bible is a message embodied. Think a hologram, right? Each angel is a telegram. And as soon as the angel delivers his message, he disappears. So the first message of the first angel is, Mazel Tov, you're going to be parents. And of course, Sarah hears this and says, I'm 90, he's 99, and Viagra won't exist for 3,500 years. Are you kidding? God says, you don't think I can do anything? She's pregnant. Don't ask me how this happens. I'm a rabbi. That leaves 2 angels. These 2 angels have a different mission. Turn to page 102. These angels have a different mission. They have a mission in the world beyond Abraham. The men set out from there and looked down towards Sodom. So Abraham lives in Kiryat Arba. Kiryat Arba is Hebron, right? It's just on the edge of the rift. There's a big rift in the earth there. You can look down and you can see the Dead Sea at the bottom of the rift. So Sodom is next to the Dead Sea. Abraham walking with them to see them off. And now the narrative stops. I just want you to look at the structure of the narrative because it's remarkable. The narrative, you're following Abraham on this warm summer day as he's walking with his guests. And the narrative stops and now gives you something completely different. Now the Lord had said, Vadonai Amar. Like, to whom? Who did the Lord say this to? He said it to himself. Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm going to do? Hamechasani me'Avraham asher Yosef. Who's God talking to? Himself. This is divine rumination. This is God inner talk. And God says, shall I hide from it? And that's the question. You see, the Bible now is taking up a philosophical issue. What is the nature of covenant? You said last week that God chose this man, Abraham, to teach him to be a representative of justice and righteousness in the world. God chose this guy to make him a vessel of blessing in the world. Well, what does that mean? And what does that come with? What perks does that come with? And if God needs this man to be his vessel in the world, what does that mean to say that God needs somebody? If God needs somebody, it's a very interesting image of divinity. This is not the fully holy, self-sufficient divinity of Aristotle. This is not the philosophical God that we learned about in philosophy class. This is a God, in many ways, much more human kind of God. This is a God who needs partners. And if I have a partner in the world, I have to share with my partner what my plans are, because once you engage a partner in the world of any kind, you become accountable to your partner. But the idea that God is accountable to man, that God is accountable to human beings, that God has to give an explanation of himself. I mean, what fun is it to be God if you got to tell people what you're going to do, you know? Now, it's Shabbos, so I don't have it with me, but I usually carry a cell phone. And the reason, because I'm accountable. I'm accountable to my wife, and I'm accountable to the families of Valley Beth Shalom. So people call me all the time, and my wife calls me all the time. Where are you? And I right, exactly right. And I'm usually a smart-ass, sarcastic. I'm at a brothel in New Orleans with Buffy, you know. And she says, no, really, where are you? You know. I said, well, I'm sitting in my office with a bar mitzvah kid. Like, what am I? Where am I? I said, well, what do you want for dinner? What are we doing for dinner? Or are we going to the, bar mitzvah Shabbos? Or, or the gate won't open. That's this week's drama. You know. But that's marriage. That's accountability. I'm accountable. And then I get calls from the shul, and we're all accountable to people. We have circles of relationships that claim us. There are people who don't want circles of relationship to claim them. They live as hermits in the world. But we who are part of relationships, a web of relationships, we're accountable to the people in those relationships. Is God accountable? It's a crazy... Man is accountable. Human beings are accountable to God, but is God accountable to us? So the Bible raises this as a question that God asks himself. Should I tell him? I'm going to destroy a city. Does he need to know? Now here's the qualifier. Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm going to do, since Abraham has become a great and populous nation, and the nations of the earth ought to bless themselves by him? He has a role in the world as a vessel of blessing. For I've singled him out that he may instruct his children, his posterity, to do the way of the Lord by doing what is just and right. He is going to be the vessel of justice and righteousness in the world. If he's going to be the vessel of justice and righteousness in the world, then he has to identify that with the ways of the Lord. He has to understand that what God does is just and right. So, I better tell him what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell him what I'm going to do. This is a crazy idea. That a human being gets clued in, something gets explained, right? We did this last year. Remember last year when we discussed this, I showed you the book of Job. The book of Job is another book of the Bible. It's a book that most Jews don't know even exists. They think it's in the other guy's Bible, but it's in ours. And Yoav. No, Eov. Yoav is the general under King David. That's a whole other story. We'll do him another year. Eov means Eov. Who is Eov? Eov is a man who is not Jewish, who is outside of our circle, and there's a story about him in the Bible. He's a man who has great wealth and great success and great fulfillment and is very pious, and God decides to mess with him. God makes a bet with Satan that if he took away all the benefits of his life, the man would not curse him. Satan and God make a bet. Remember, Einstein said God doesn't play dice with the universe? The book of Job disagrees. God plays cards with Satan, and he puts Job in the pot. And he says, go ahead, do whatever you want, just don't kill him. So Job is tortured terribly, loses his family, loses his wealth, loses his health, right? And then the whole book is about what happens next. And what happens next is that Job turns his eyes toward heaven and says, what are you doing this to me? Why would you do this to me? I've been pious, I've been good. Why would you do this? And then part of the curse is he has neighbors. And the neighbors are these pious people. And the pious people come by and they say, oh, you must have done something really bad to deserve this, right? That's not the way you comfort a person who suffers. You don't go to a person who's suffering and say, well, it's your own damn fault. You don't do that. But the neighbors of Job didn't get that memo. So they come one by one and they tell him, you must have done something pretty terrible to deserve this. And Job says, first of all, I can't remember I didn't do anything. I'm a good guy. And if I did something, I don't remember it. And if the purpose of the punishment is to get me to repent what I did, tell me what I did. What good does it do to whack me and not tell me what I did? And it must have been one mother of a sin if this is what's happening to me. And tell me what, and then he says, no, I didn't do it. This is unjust. And he accuses God of injustice. Remember? And then what happens at the end of the book? Can I give away the ending? Yeah. At the end of the book, God shows up. But you know how God shows up with Elijah in the still small voice? God shows up for Moses and the burning bush. God shows up for Job in a hurricane, right? Hurricane Job. This hurricane, zillion-mile-an-hour winds, driving rain, just incredible power. And God says, who do you think you are? Shut up. You're nobody, right? If I'm casting the movie, this is either the early Robert De Niro. You talking to me? You talking to the taxi driver, right? You talking, or else it's the late Joe Pesci, right? Later Joe Pesci. Now he's not dead. The later Joe Pesci, right? Which is, like, who are you? Who do you think you are? God says, shut up. And at the end of the book of Job, Job shuts up. Job says, okay, I give up. I relent. Now, in the book of Job, the whole purpose of the book of Job is that God doesn't tell us what he's going to do. That's the point of the book of Job. Here, God asks the question, is Abraham different? Is Abraham different? Is Abraham of a different status, and therefore, do I owe Abraham an explanation? Because he's covenanted. Because he's the vessel of righteousness. So, First he says, I'm going to go take a look and see if it's true. And then he goes, and then the conversation begins. Go down to verse 22, right? The men went on to there from Sodom. Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Verse 23, Vayigash Avraham. The word Vayigash means to step up to the plate. Okay, if the Bible knew baseball, the Bible knows almost everything. But if the Bible, he stepped into the encounter. And Abraham came forward. And he said, will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? What if there be 50 innocent in the city? Will you wipe out the place and not forgive it for the sake of the 50? Far be it from you to do, Chalilalecha, shame on you. Chalilalecha, shame on you. To do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as the guilty, so that innocent and guilty fare alike. Chalilalecha, far be it from you, shall not the judge of all the earth do justly. What does Abraham do? God says, I'm going to tell him what I'm going to do. He indicates to Abraham what he's going to do, and Abraham comes back and says, you can't do that. You can't do that. Why not? Because if you wipe out the city, innocent and guilty alike, you create a world where there's no moral differentiation between right and wrong, between good and evil, between innocent and guilty. That's not the world you want to create. Chalilalecha, shame on you. That's not the world you want to. Abraham scolds him. He scolds him. You can't have that. You can't do that. Now, at this point, God has to be thinking, like, what do I need this service for? I got Job to shut up. Abraham, is this what I want? Because this is what happens when you allow another human being into your life. That human being has a claim on you. And the claim here is a moral claim. What's amazing here is that man and God speak a moral language. And the moral language is right and wrong. And if you're going to have a man in the world represent divinity, divine right and wrong, that man has a right to use that standard against you. I don't know if any of you have teenage children. Whoever told you, Dad, you can't do that? You say, why not? Because you told me it's wrong. You know? Once you have established a moral standard, you become accountable. You are claimed by that moral standard. This is a remarkable, this is a mind-blowing idea. And it's so mind-blowing that the Bible says, let's have some fun. Let's have some fun with this. Let's see how far he can go. This is really a thought experiment. You got to feel this as a thought experiment. Now, the next thing is, so what does God say? God says, right? God says, verse 26, God says, okay. Why does God say okay? What does it mean to say God says okay? God says, I'm going to destroy the city. Man says, you can't do that. It's wrong. God says, all right. And God says, okay. God says, I changed my mind. You're right. What? You're right. You've corrected. Look, amazing God, right? Now, why is... you imagine, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, where you have to challenge authority. When you challenge authority, authority usually strikes back. I taught this to the high school kids a couple of weeks ago. We had a great, you ever gone to a teacher and told the teacher they were wrong? He said, what happened? He said, I got detention for 3 years, How do you question authority? You question authority on the basis of common values, right? God is willing to relinquish the prerequisites of his majesty and the signs of his authority because Abraham is arguing on the basis of their common commitment to justice. In the name of justice, God is willing to say, you know something? You're right. Okay, you win. God says you win. You're right. Imagine that. God's willing. God doesn't stand on authority, right? How many of us as parents have ever said to our kids, because I said so, or because I'm your father? And then you go home and you say, oh my God, I never wanted to say that to my kid, but there I am saying it. That's when you're defending authority, simply because it's authority, it's majesty. But when you say, you know something, you might be right. That's when you're saying, my authority isn't as important as our common commitment to a value. And your embracing that value is actually something that I cherish. So God says, okay. But now the Bible's going to really have a little fun, right? Because Abraham has sold enough camels in the Shuk of Beersheba that he knows what happens when you get a live one in the shop. Right? So he says, 40. You said 50, right? 50. You saved the city. What if 5 are missing? 5, 10%. 50 minus 5 is 45. Do I hear 45? I got 45. Do I hear a 40? Can I see a 40 in the room? I see a 40 in the room. Do I hear a 30? There's a 30 on the side. Do I hear a 20? Can I see a 20? Is there a 20? Is there anyone who'd like to go? I see a 20 over there. Do I hear a 10? Will we go as far as 10? Can I see, a 10 going once, going twice? So, the crazy story. Like you're handling with God? Like, what is this? Crazy. Handling with, goes down to 10? You find me 10 people in a city, you'll save the whole city? Now, you could ask, why not 1? That's a whole other story. But but you see what's going on is this question of what does it mean to be covenanted? To be covenanted means you stand for a set of common values that even God is accountable to, and you have a right to shake your fist at heaven and say, no, damn it. I'll show you one interesting thing. You see the line in verse number 27. This is when he begins the bargaining, right? God's agreed to 50. Abraham spoke up saying, here I venture to speak, my Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. What if the 50 lack 5? I who am but dust and ashes. What am I? I'm a nobody. I'm a dust and ashes. What if I pack 5? You give me 45? Right? It's ironic. You see the irony there? I who am but dust and ashes, but I got you. Now I got you. You know I got you. You know this. You knew this was coming when you named the number. There's only two places in the entire Hebrew Bible where a person says, I who am dust and ashes. You know what the other place is? The end of the book of Job. At the end of the book of Job, when Job capitulates, when he gives in, God comes to him and says, shut up. Job says, I who am but dust and ashes, relent and relinquish my claim. Two places where a man's dust and ashes, but the phrase means completely different things in the two contexts. In Abraham, it's ironic. I who am but dust and ashes, but you got to give me 45, you know? You see? And in Job, he means it. I'm dust and ashes, therefore I can't claim you. I can't ask justice of you. I'm not in a position to ask justice of you. And the difference is because Abraham is covenanted. He has been assigned the role of being God's vessel of blessing in the world. He's assigned the role of spokesman for justice in the world. Job is every man. The name Job, by the way, the name Eov in Hebrew, you'll never hear a Jewish kid named Eov. I've named a lot of Jewish kids a lot of weird names. You know, Mackenzie, Crystal, Whitney, Taylor, Hunter. I name them all. You come to my nursery school any morning. I got 18 Dylans, right? We're starting to get Khaleesi's, you know, and Khaleesi, it's the names from Game of Thrones. Right? Oh, no, a lot of Jadens, a lot of Khaleesi, all kinds of, you name it. I go to baby name, I love baby name, I love children, you know, your Hebrew name will be sort of Fege Chaya, and in English your name will be Teapot, you know, Arkansas, right, Goldfarb. You know, I mean, I've done this, it's really funny, right? No, it's true. I have a friend who's got a kid, and I got two families. I know one kid, that one of the names is Madison, and the other kid, the name is Lexington. So I said, you got to have a third kid. It's either Park or Fifth, depending on which way you go. I mean, you know, name the Wilshire, Sepulveda, Doheny. I mean, you get all these weird names, but Dylan is one of the big ones there. Like every kid is Dylan, right? I'm going to gather them all in my room one of these days and play some music for them so they'll know who they're named for. The answer, my friend, was born in the wind. You'll never hear a Jewish kid named Job. It's not a Hebrew name. It's Akkadian. It's an ancient language, much older than Hebrew, thousands of years older than Hebrew, because the story is older than the Bible. The story is a much older story. And in ancient Akkadian, the name Job is John Doe. Every man. The name Eov is, you know, I get his mail. The name Eov, occupant, resident, John Doe. He is a cipher for the common human experience. The common human experience meets God in nature. Nature is not accountable to your or my moral standards, right? It's going to rain on the good people and rain on the evil people. Earthquakes knock down the houses of rabbis and knock down the houses. Nature, which is how Job meets God, is not accountable. But Abraham is in a different status. He's covenanted. And because he's covenanted, he's in a position to ask God something that nobody else is in a position to ask. He's in a position to demand of God justice. That's the purpose of this story. That's what makes this story extraordinary. Right? This is the sort of job description of the Jewish people. Go in the world and demand justice. Right? That's what the story is about. I call this chutzpah in my book. Because chutzpah is this sense in which I'm empowered and I'm responsible to demand justice. That's the first episode. That's one episode of the covenantal drama. Then we turn a couple pages and we come across the second episode. There's a whole long story here about that he goes to Sodom. The angels go to Sodom and they rescue Lot. And it's not pretty, and Lot and his daughters. It's a long story. And then we get another one of these "my wife is my sister" numbers. Please don't do this at home. Didn't work for Abraham. And then Sarah gives birth, and Isaac is born, and Isaac is circumcised and weaned. There's a bris and then turn to page 117. Now we come to the second image. And what's extraordinary here is you're now going to have a second narrative, which is in some ways diametrically opposed to the first. And part of the question of understanding this week's Parsha is, what do we do with this contrast. Which story is normative? Which story describes who we are as people, what our religious universe is? And it's a story you all know. It's the most quoted story in the Bible, but it's also the most opaque. That is, the biblical texts leave things out. They don't tell us what the inside of characters are. They only tell us what characters do. They leave out major details of stories. And they leave out reasons for stories. So after all of that, here's the story on page 117, right? Chapter 22. Sometime after that, God put Abraham to the test. He said to him, Abraham, Abraham. He said, here I am. And he said, take your son, your favorite one, Isaac, whom you love, go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I'll offer to you. Now, here's what I want to suggest. We're going to do a little exercise today. In fact, we're going to do this differently than we usually do, because you're going to get to make the Midrash. Midrash is the Jewish way of reading holy texts. The word Midrash can be used in three senses, three definitions, right? Number one, Midrash is a way of reading a text, which we're going to learn in just a minute. Number two, the word Midrash can refer to any particular interpretation of a text. So if I say to you, there's a Midrash which teaches this, that's because some rabbi sometime once gave that as an interpretation. Third, when you take a bunch of those interpretations and you bind them into a book, that book is called a Midrash. So there's a book called Breshit Rabbah, which means the big Genesis, which gives you one line of Bible and 300 pages of interpretation. That's a Midrash. So the word Midrash can be used in all three sentences. The word Midrash comes from the word darash, which means to go look for something, to go inquire for something. It's a way of interpreting a text. And the game of Midrash is really simple. Start by looking at the text carefully and asking every possible question. Every possible question. So look at our first verse. Ready? Just look. Get to the end of the sentence, and then sometime afterwards, God put Abraham to the test. All right. What questions could you ask about that phrase?
Sometime relative to what?
All right. Sometime after what? Okay. Go ahead. Give me another one. What test? Can you pass this test? Can you study for this test? Can you get a C? You know. Anybody ever take a driving test? Isn't it interesting that you can get 70% on a driving test and get a driving license? Are you happy driving the streets of LA knowing that the people out there have failed 30% of those questions? I mean, what if you're, it just occurred to me, like, what if a cop pulls you over and you say, but officer, that was one of the 30% I got off? Yes, please. Michael. Yeah, just give me another question.
Okay, you're looking for Midrash here.
I'm looking for questions.
You're looking for questions?
I'm forming Midrash.
All right, I want to ask that. I don't have the questions. Why don't we wait?
Okay, good. Give me another question. It's about that first verse. Yes?
What is the purpose of the test?
Yes, what's the purpose of the test? Abraham's an old guy. He's been doing God's work for a whole lifetime. Oh, now you come and test him? Wouldn't you think you'd have tested him at the beginning of his life, not at the end of his life? Right? What are you going to find out? And you're God. How come? What do you need to find out about the guy that you don't know already? Right? Go ahead. Give me some more. What happens if you fail? Great. Good question. Go ahead. Did anybody see something strange about the beginning of this story?
Sometimes after.
Yeah, what kind of weird way is that at the beginning of the story? I always want to begin a sermon with the word, and furthermore? And everybody in the shul would go, what? Did I miss the beginning? What do you mean sometime after? Like, what kind of weird way? Once upon a time. That's the beginning of a story. All right, look at the next verse. He said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. Anything strange in that? Yeah, it's a little formal for people that have been talking to each other for the last 70 years. Yes, please, Ronnie.
You know where I am. I mean,
Right.
you're God. You know
Yeah.
exactly where I am.
Right. Okay. How did Abraham know it was God talking to him?
You recognize the voice.
Mel, will you make me a promise? If God ever talks to you and says, Mel, and you say, here I am, will you come call me first? Especially if he tells you to kill somebody. No, seriously. How does he know it's God and not somebody pretending? How does he know it's not his own mishigas? How do you know it's God when God talks to you? Most of us, by the way, if you get up in the morning and go to a coffee shop, order a coffee, and tell the waitress that God talked to you, she'll pour you another cup of coffee. Yeah.
God asking Abraham, where are you?
Yeah.
When Abraham was young, he had one outlook on life.
Yeah.
When Abraham got older and more knowledge, he has a different outlook on life.
Yeah.
So God is asking him, where are you? Not the place.
So
but
you're
where
putting
are-
the words "where are you" in
his mind.
All right,
Where are
fair
you?
enough. Good. That's a midrash. That's an answer, not a question. Take your son, your favorite one, Isaac, whom you love. Go to the land of Moriah. Offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights I'll point out to you. Yeah, that's a good question. Are you nuts? Killing my kid? Right? First of all, what was God's promise to Abraham? Multitude of peoples. Zillion, like the stars in the sky and the sands on the beach. And who would be their ancestor? Isaac. So if you kill the kid, what happens? You break the promise. If you refuse to keep the commandment, what happens? I mean, you understand that this is a trap. You can't win this one.
God talked to me.
Uh-oh.
Anytime I lost something,
Yeah.
and I said, God, please help me. I find it.
I'm glad.
Please.
I need your phone number. I lose stuff all the time. Car keys, investments. I need help. So if someone would please tell me, buy Microsoft,
I have a question.
It's why not tell him where? Look at the commandment. It's an interest. God's calling. Hineni. I love it. God would call us on his cell phone now. That would be right. You see how the game is played? I like the Christmas theme. I'm getting, Christmas music is starting to come on the radio. So I love Christmas music. I sing it all the time. My kids go out of their mind. Mama, you're not supposed to sing that. Why? I love it. It's wonderful. Especially here. It's going to be 92 degrees today. And I had a friend call me yesterday from Milwaukee. And he said, just do me a favor, put the phone up next to the window. I just want to, he says, it's 20 degrees, we've had snow and rain. I just want to feel the warmth, I said, sure, no problem. It's like, hey, they walk around in board shorts singing Christmas songs. I just love LA. Kill the kid. Kill the kid. Now, by the way, in case you're one of those people who says, oh, this is a story about child sacrifice. No, it's not. Killing your children was not something that desert people did. Killing children is something city people did. No. Think of this for a minute. In the desert, you need all the kids you can get because you need more hands to watch the flocks. It's only in cities where you have a concentration of population and a limited amount of space for the growth of population that you end up with the demographics of child sacrifice. Only in cities with walls around them, when you can't grow beyond the walls, do people sacrifice their kids. In the desert, kids are a blessing. Kids are always a blessing. So this is not a normal thing to do. Why go to Moriah? Why not just do it here? And why does he tell him, on one of the hills I'll point out to you? Again, this is like Lech Lecha. Remember Lech Lecha? God says, leave home and go to a place I'm going to show you. Like, what kind of directions? I've met God when I'm looking for things. How do I, just keep going, you'll find it. I mean, give me directions, damn it. Give me your GPS, right? So early the next morning, Abraham saddled his ass, took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac, split the wood for the burnt offering, and set out for the place God showed him. Anything strange about that? How old is Abraham?
99.
What does he have? Servants. If he has servants, how come he's saddling the ass and splitting the... That's what you have servants to do for. And he's 90, 100-something years old now. And he's the richest man in the world. Bill Gates does not pump his own gas. Of this, I'm quite sure. Warren Buffett probably does, but Bill Gates don't. So why does he do this himself? But the most important thing isn't listed here. You see the little space in the text between I will point out to you, period, close quotation, space, little number 3, so early the next morning. You see that little space there? Fill in that space for me. Did Abraham sleep that night? Did he sleep? What was he thinking about? What is the interior of the character at this point? Now, when we were kids, we were taught the sort of party line. The party line was, Abraham is a man of faith. Everything God says, he runs off to do. Really? As you get older, you realize, really? A man who waited till he was 100 to have a child, finally has a son, holds that son in his arms. God says, kill the kid. Really? 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 And Sarah, where is she in the narrative? How do you fit her into the narrative? Really? So there's a whole world of inner life that's missing from the narrative that Midrash has to find a way to fill in. And that's what Midrash does. That's how Midrash works. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do something we've never done before in Valley Beshalom Torah study history, in the long, august history. We're going to learn Beit Midrash style. Now, normally we'd have big tables, and we'd sit around big tables with big books. But all we have are these lousy pews and no tables and no refreshments. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to read the narrative through with a partner. Okay? You can read it 2, 3 on your bench. Read the narrative through. Read it out loud. Don't read it to yourself. Read it out loud. Stop after each sentence and ask yourself, what's not answered in that sentence? What is the open question in the sentence? Okay? That's number one. Second thing you're going to do, I gave you some midrashim. These are selections from traditional Jewish interpretive traditions. When you've read it through yourself and have a sense of what's missing in the narrative, then take the midrashim and read each one. And ask what question this midrash is trying to answer. What question is the midrash trying to answer? And do you like the answer? And if you don't like the answer, what answer would you like to give to that question? Third, you ready? It's a big assignment. So first, read it out loud with your partner and see the gaps in the story. Second, read some of the midrashim and see if they answer some of the gaps and if you like that. Then I want your midrash. And the biggest question about the whole story is, why is this story here? Why is this story here? What is the purpose of this story? Question. You got a question already? Question, Sandy?
I just needed the page number.
Oh, it's page on 117. It starts at, it's Genesis 22, starting with the first verse, and it ends somewhere around verse 19. It ends at verse 19. So, first, read it with a partner and find the gaps. Second, read the midrashim with your partner and see if you like the answers. Third, I want you to answer the question, why is this story here? That's your assignment. We'll be back together in a few minutes. What do you need? I'll get you in a minute.
Starting where? It's only 19.
Rob, you okay? You okay?
Well done.
No, we have to do, you guys got to include the rabbi. Come on. Study with these guys. They're good. What? He's teaching. He's not teaching. He's visiting Florida. He's someplace. He's traveling today. He's well.
Read out loud.
My first question is, and so what the hell is he doing at that point? And that you certainly get no indication of what Abraham's thinking. So the early next morning, he saddled his ass, took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. So Feinstein already pointed out, he did the shit. And he's taking Isaac. Did he happen to tell his wife where they were going? He split the wood for the burnt offering and set out for the place which God told him. What do you think that means?
God did not tell him.
We didn't get that, did we? Where he told him. That's implied. So he travels for 3 days, and he looked up and saw the place from afar. So there's sort of an implied, we're going to tell him where they are, right? Line 5. Then he said to his servants, you stay there here with the ass. The boy and I will go up there. We will worship and we will return to you. How does he know? He uses the word we will return to you. And he just said he's going to kill his kid. How do we get we will return? Yeah. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on his son Isaac. So what? Isaac's the beast of burden at that point? He himself took the firestone and the knife, and the two walked off together. Now, I've been a parent, and I've never got to do that, where it's like, here, you carry all this stuff, and I'll walk up there. You've done that? Then Isaac said to his father, Abraham, Father. And he answered, yes, my son. And he said, here's the fine stone, and here's the wood. Where's the sheep? And Abraham said, God will see to the sheep for his burnt offering, my son. And the two of them walked on together. So he's lying to his kid? Or is he?
Yes, when he was lying to the servants beforehand. It says, we will come back.
They arrived at the place of which God had told them. Abraham built an altar there. He laid out the wood. He bound his son Isaac. He laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Okay. Abraham's an altar cocker. How does he bind his son? And why is the son not saying, what the hell are you doing?
He does it eventually, but why wouldn't the son resist?
What?
Why wouldn't the son resist?
Why
I've always been interested in the phrase bound his son.
Isn't that the word Akedah? Vayera code. That's where it's called the Akedah, the binding. And Abraham picked up the knife to slay his son.
It's always seemed to me that especially because of the name of it, the reference to it, that's the act. Binding.
The act of binding, yes. Then the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and says, Abraham, Abraham. Is that twice in Hebrew? 11? No, it doesn't say that. It just says Abraham. No, it says Vayomer Abraham. It is twice. And there's something in the text between them. See that in the Hebrew right there? What the hell is that? And he's answered, Hineni, here I am. And he said, do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your favored one, from me. Ed, can I ask you a question? Rabbi, can I ask you a question? Is this right here in the Torah, this line right here,
What?
where it says Abraham, Abraham, is What's that line?
It's a grammatical thing. There's a space in the Torah there.
And that's supposed to indicate that?
Supposed to what?
Indicate something, a space in the Torah.
But why is it space?
So, at this point, is God saying this? You've done good? I mean, I know
Sorry, is there another sheet for a lady?
No sheets. We're out of sheets. And this is Rabbi Schulweis saying that voice is his conscience. But I don't know what the. When Abraham looked up, his eyes fell on a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. So Abraham went to the ram, offered it a burnt offering in place of his son.
This is the part of the Torah that troubles most people the most.
Of course it is. And if you look at it, it's in the daily morning prayer service every day. And Abraham named that site Adonai Yira, whence the present saying, on the mount of the Lord there is vision. So what is this? He finally saw something? What's your name, by the way?
Wes.
Okay, nice to meet you. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven.
Well, the question is, what kind of a God would do this? That's the question, right?
A God that you want no part of.
If a person wants to argue against religion, they use this. What kind of a God would do something like that? What is the effect on Isaac and the rest of his life?
Oh, a lot. Because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your favored one. So now there's some sort of implication of a reward?
Or a doubt that he's
I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in heavens, the sands and the seashore, and your descendants shall seize the gates of your foes. Is the implication of that only because of this? He's already said that I'll do that.
No. What I'm saying is that we put that together with the Solomon and Gomorrah story, where he argues morality with God. Why is he being tested?
All the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by his descendants because you've obeyed my commands. That's different than what is the first time. It just said, go and fine, I will teach you. And here's the most troubling of them all. Abraham then returned to his servants, and they departed together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. 1, he lived in Hebron. 2, who's missing from that?
Sarah's missing.
No. Abraham then returned to his servants. Where does it say Isaac went?
It doesn't say he's there, and it doesn't say he's not there.
No, Abraham then returned to his servants. It doesn't say Abraham and Isaac. This act had, I don't know, this act had, implications beyond the, well, this is the great thing that Victoria told us to tell because of this great thing.
And why is this in the Torah?
For the same reason that Job is in the Bible. Doesn't play well on TV.
Doesn't play well on Yom Kippur.
Rosh Hashanah. Hey, Ed?
Just a minute, and then we'll come back together again. Okay?
Have you ever read Herman Luke's, the language God talks?
Good.
He writes about writing wins over in remembrance.
Yeah.
He writes about the character Aaron Jasper, the night while he's in Theresa before he goes to Auschwitz. And he describes Job as a metaphor for the Jewish people and all the suffering that they have experienced throughout their history. And saying that, and yet they still continue to have faith. We're still ants in the universe, inconsequential, and nothing.
Yeah. All right, we're going to wrap this up in 2 minutes, so finish your conversation. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if everyone will please come have a seat. Come have a seat, come have a seat. People want to learn, it's good. Okay, good morning, good morning, good morning.
Back to the regular stuff now.
You took your chair, Rob.
I'll take the chair back. Good morning. At the end of the Torah, Moses says to the people Israel, thank you, that mitzvah says that this Torah, this instruction that I've given you, isn't beyond you. It's not in heaven that you have to send someone to go get it. It's not across the street, a sea that you have to go get someone to get it. It's yours. You own it. Now you know why that's true. Right? The rabbinate is ultimately a self-liquidating profession. Because this is your Torah, not my Torah. This is our Torah. This is the Torah of the Jewish people. And this story in particular is so much of a puzzle. It's so disturbing and stimulating, inspiring, remarkable, astonishing, and opaque that for generations and generations, Jews have done what you just spent a few minutes doing, trying to figure the damn thing out. What does it mean? Why is it here? And you can do it either in its details, in the little details. And you saw some of that on the sheet that I gave you. Sometime afterwards. After what? And where's Sarah in the story? And there's all these little details of the story. One of the most remarkable details of the story, I don't know how many of you got to the end of the story, but twice in the story, the narrative says, Vayalchu shnechem yachdav. They went up the mountain together. It says it twice. When it says it twice, it wants you to pay attention to it. But at the end of the story, Abraham comes down the mountain with the servant and meets the servants. But there's no Isaac. Where's Isaac? What happened? And so there's these little details of the story that are these little winks and clues to point to you to layers of meaning of the story which are remarkable. And there's lots and lots of those in this particular very powerful narrative. But the biggest question to the narrative is the one that Rabbi Hartman at the very end of my worksheet tried to answer for you, which is, what is this narrative for? What's the point of this narrative? What's the meaning of the narrative? What's the bigger picture of the narrative? And the question that Rabbi Hartman is going to deal with in that very little short section I gave you there was, is this narrative normative? Which means, does this story define our relationship to God? Is religion about submitting to the voice of God and doing whatever God tells you to do, even if it seems to be something that is impossible, morally impossible, in terms of your heart and soul impossible? Is it surrender to the voice of God? Is that the normative? Is that the normative mode of religion? Or is the other story, the Sodom and Gomorrah story, where Abraham says to God, you can't do that because it's unjust? Is that the normative? And this means something else. What's the meaning of the narrative? And we'll take a look before we finish today at the very end, at those two sources at the very end, because this is what the bigger question is: what's the meaning of this? Where does this narrative fit in religious life? So as you went through the narrative, what did you discover? Anybody to make interesting discoveries about the narrative? Yes, please, sir.
Abraham held God responsible to what he had preached him before. Therefore, when he goes up to the mountain, he knew that he would not sacrifice his son. He knew that because he says to his servant, do this, do that until we come back, not I come back.
Yeah, no Jewish man has ever lied to a servant before, right?
Anyway, he knew, and the purpose of this is to give us the notion that we give our best, the one that we love the
Yeah, but if
most.
he knew that he wasn't going to sacrifice him, then he's not giving his best. It's all a sham, right?
No.
Oh, yes.
No, he's showing.
Oh, yes.
God is showing that we have to give the one that we love the most to others.
To others?
This
Well,
is the
if God said,
sacrifice.
take your son, your only one, the one you love, and find him a wife, that's a mitzvah I could live with. But that's not what he says. I mean, I appreciate your midrash, and there are people that hold that midrash. But you see, if Abraham doesn't think he's really going to do it in the end, then it's not a test. It's not a sacrifice at all. It's not a gift at all. If I bring a gift to you and knowing that you're not going to accept it, wink, wink, it's not a gift. Right? Oh, I brought you a Lexus. Oh, you didn't want a Lexus. Oh, then I'll keep it. I like that kind of thing. Maybe I'll try that. But you see, it only works if he really believes he's going to give up the kid. But how can he give up the kid? First of all, how can he give up the kid as a father? How can he give up the kid as a human being? And how can he give up the kid as being promised that this is the progenitor of all of that promise that he was promised? I understand what you're trying to do. I understand how you're trying to answer the problem. It's still a problem. It's still a problem. So let's get a few more, not about this, but about the things you found in the story that you think are profound, that are important. So pass the mic around. Douglas, you get first?
Yeah.
Wow.
Hell, I got the mic.
That's true. That's
He
true. You
went to
do.
Beersheba.
Yeah.
He lived in Kiryat Arba.
Yeah. Who lives in Beersheba, by the way? Oh, did you just say Hagar? Who said Hagar? Oh, very nasty. Oh, the girlfriend lives in Beersheba. The wife lives in Hebron. Where does Abraham go home? Oh, come on. And by the way, after she dies, she's going to die in the next story. You saw that in the Midrash, right? The next story in the Torah is Chaye Sarah. She dies, so the Midrash connects the two. Then Abraham goes and marries a woman named Keturah and has 11 more kids. Kanai Nahara. Right? And the tradition says, at 147, Kanai Nahara. And the tradition says Keturah is Hagar. He goes to Beersheba. And there's a whole tradition. Well, there's traditions about this. Yes?
We wondered where was Isaac's voice in this matter.
Where is Isaac's voice? First of all, tell me how old Isaac is.
I think he's 33 at this time.
Well, if he's 33 or if he's 10, does it make a difference?
A little bit.
And when you get to this verse, he only speaks once. He says to his father, Father, and he answered, yes, my son. Everybody speaks in this Shakespearean call and response, right? Here are the firestone and the wood, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? Now, if you imagine a 10-year-old saying that, and then you imagine a 17-year-old saying that, and then you imagine a 33-year-old saying that, you end up with a completely different story.
And to imagine Isaac maybe a child with learning differently.
Well, that's a whole other thing. Is it, you know, he's a.
No, seriously, if you
I'm not.
imagine
I'm serious.
not necessarily
Wait, hang on.
neurotypical child.
Wait. Rabbis do this. They talk right out. It's okay. So Sherry was on vacation, so she's in a good mood. Go ahead.
I just want to add that if you imagine Isaac at any of those ages and then add that he may not be neurotypical, right? He may be a child at 33 who has special needs. And no, don't laugh. It's been studied. There's a whole book written about it, right? If you imagine him, not every child is neurotypical. What if you imagine him very different? Or maybe if he's a child at 33 who's disabled in terms of his learning, then asking where's the sheep is a very innocent Tom question versus if he's a very intellectual 33 neurotypical, asking where the sheep is a very different question.
Well,
so it's not just age.
Right.
There's all the factors that make a human soul.
So as any actor will tell you, David's not here today, but he's my actor friend. As any actor will tell you, the way that you intone that line changes the entire story. If it's asked, as Sherry said, Tom, which means simple. Papa, we do sacrifices. We have the knife, we have the wood. Where's the sheep? That's a simple-minded answer. That tells you a certain kind of kid and a certain kind of relationship to his father. Okay, now he's a 17-year-old with those things in his ears and his pants jacked up to the bottom of his tuchus, right? Boom, 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 boom. Hey, Pop. And with the cynicism of a 17-year-old. Like every 17-year-old knows everything and just can barely tolerate the stupidity of the rest of us, right? And he's saying to his father, Mom says you're a religious fanatic. Are you as crazy as Mom says? How about this one? And then if he's a 33-year-old, and he's saying to his father, and he's typical, he's saying to his father, I know what we have to do, let's go do it. In the Islamic Midrash, there is a whole tradition of Muslim Midrash. In the Islamic tradition, it's Isaac who carries Abraham up the mountain. And it's Isaac who binds himself on the altar. And it's Isaac who says to his father, go ahead and do it. Get it done. God commanded this. We follow God. Get it done. It's Isaac. And that's where you get the Islamic tradition of suicide, of martyrdom. Because it comes from Isaac who's doing this himself. Now, some traditions are Ishmael and some traditions are Isaac, but in either case, it's the kid who leads the process, right? You know, and depending on the kid, how you read the kid, then you read the father, and you read the relationship between the two of them, right? And that's a remarkable. I mean, what's Abraham feeling when he hears those words from his son? And then there's one other thing, which is that this was the kid Sarah prayed for her whole life. Right? And this was the kid that she finally had. Has Abraham ever spent time with this kid? I mean, we assume that daddies play Little League with their sons and take them to Home Depot and stuff, but maybe not. Because in this culture, kids were raised in the mother's tent. What if this is the first time Abraham has spent time with his son? And the 3 days walk, and you saw there was a midrash about the 3 days walk. The 3 days walk is the first time the two of them ever began to speak to each other and began to learn about each other. And what happens during those 3 days walk? And you can imagine it, one of the scenarios is that on those 3 days walk, Abraham falls in love with his son. A son he's never really met before. And it's the 3 days walk that he's bonding closer and closer, which makes the agony of the sacrifice of what's coming even worse. You see what the midrash? Why 3 days walk? 3 days, by the way, is a number in the Bible, right? It's 2 days Rosh Hashanah and a day Yom Kippur, right? I mean, it's 3 days of what? And there's a midrash they had there, which tries to answer the question, why 3 days? Okay, who else had? Someone else? Lots more. But I'm gonna have to cut this off at some point, but you'll get to talk, I promise you. But this is, what we just did, is what Jews have been doing for the last 3,500 years. We learned Torah together. And this story is too delicious to let rabbis tell you what it means. You have to encounter this story and feel it. Yes, please.
So when God took the Israelites out of Egypt,
Yeah.
and they were in front of the sea,
Yeah.
they had nothing to do, no other choice but walk into the sea
Right.
until the sea split.
Right.
So there was a gut feeling, there was an emunah, or whatever you want to call it, that God, after the 10 plagues and everything else that they had gone through, was going to show up and save them.
Right.
What if this is also a test that it's not a test of Abraham, but a test of God put in front of Abraham?
Okay, did you see the midrash on the sheet? It comes from, there's versions of this midrash, but the one that I took here comes from the Tanchuma, and it was rewritten by Eli Wiesel. And here's the midrash, right? The midrash is number 5. When God sent the angel to restrain Abraham, Abraham refused to heed the call. I talk to the boss, not the underlings, right? Right? Because did you notice, by the way, in this story, when the angel shows up, they were, look at verse, I'll just read it to you. On page 119, verse 9. They arrived at the place at which God had told him. Abraham built an altar. He set out the wood. He bound his son Isaac. He laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Abraham picked up the knife to slay his son. He has intention. He's going to do it. He picks up the knife, and at the very moment that the knife is raised, an angel of the Lord called to him from heaven. Who's speaking? Abraham, Abraham. Who said that? The angel. And he answered, here I am. And he said, do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him. Who's speaking? The angel. For now I know you fear God. That's the angel talking. Since you have not withheld your son, your favored one, from me. Who's talking now? Now wait a minute. Come on, guys. Either it's the angel or it's God. In the middle of the sentence, the speaker of the line changes so that the midrash jumps right in. When you have a gap like that, that's an invitation to midrash. So the midrash says, what happened was, the angel said, don't touch the kid. And Abraham said, listen, I don't take orders from underlings. I only take orders from the boss. You send the Godfather. Right? So Don Corleone shows up, right? God himself ordered me to sacrifice my son. It's up to him to rescind the offer. If you ever look, if you go online, I have it in my office. I was going to bring it, but it's not big enough. The Rembrandt painting of this. In the Rembrandt painting of the story, Abraham's arm is flexed. He's pushing the knife down, and the angel is pulling it out of his hand. Wrestling angels is a Jewish hobby. Why is Abraham trying to kill the kid? Because he was told to do so by God. And the angel says, stop. And he says, no, I'm not going to listen to you. God told me. So God shows up, right? With the knife at the throat of his son, he begins to argue. Now, listen to me, God, or the kid gets it. Right? I swear I shall not leave the altar, Lord, before I speak my mind. Speak, says God. Calm down. Speak, right? Did you not promise me that my descendants would be as numerous as the stars of the sky? Yes, I promise you. And whose descendants would that be? Mine alone? No, said God, they'd be Isaac's as well. And didn't you promise me they would inherit the earth? Yes, I promise you. And whose descendants? Mine alone? No, they'd be Isaac's as well. Well then, my Lord, said Abraham, I could have pointed out to you before that your order contradicted your promise. I could have spoken up, but I didn't. I contained my grief and held my tongue, and in return I want you to make me the following promise, that when in the future my children and children's children throughout the generations will act against your law and against your will, you will also say nothing and forgive them. So be it, God agreed. Let them but retell this tale, and they will be forgiven. So in the end, this is Tanchuma. So this is a 5th century, 4th, 5th century midrash. What happens in this story? It turns out that it's Abraham testing God. If you're going to take my kid, if that's the kind of God you want, I don't want to have generations. Because if you're just another one of the gods who demands children's lives, that's not what I want. I want a God of life, not a God of death. Right? So that's another, and by the way, the last line, that's the reason why you read this story Rosh Hashanah. It's not the ram. I mean, the ram's cute, but it's not the ram, right? Let them but retell this tale and they will be forgiven. That's why you read this story Rosh Hashanah, because this is the invitation. And if you were stayed awake and read the Zichronot section of the Musaf on Rosh Hashanah, it's all about the Akedah. because he was willing to do this, God, please forgive us. Zocher et habrit. That's the zichronot part. Now, what tale? That's the question. What tale? What story are we retelling so that God is willing to forgive us? Is it the story of Abraham willing to sacrifice the kid? Or is it the story of Abraham arguing and testing God? Is it the chutzpah? I mean, that's an interesting idea. That it's the expression of Abraham's chutzpah that God's waiting to hear, because he wants to know if we inherited that chutzpah. If we inherited that chutzpah, he'll forgive our sins and give us another year. If we've become obsequious and submissive, then God's not interested in us. It's a very interesting idea. That God so much enjoys this encounter of a human being who's willing to argue back, that it's the story of the argument that God is cherishing. Who has the mic? Rav.
I want to share with you the interpretation of Mordechai Kaplan as to the significance of this story.
Yeah.
I can see it like yesterday, 75 years ago. His last year at the Jewish Theological Seminary, I was a freshman. All of the rabbis were there. It was supposed to be a high holiday sermon seminar. And they were there with their pads and their pencils trying to get information for their sermon. And here is Mordechai Kaplan, the founder of Reconstructionism, an elegant man dressed in a beautiful black suit and a black Homburg and a beard and an English accent. He said the significance, the true significance of this story, Rabbi Feinstein alluded to it, Vayelchu shnehem yachdav. And they walked together, father and son, one to kill, one to be killed, one to sacrifice, one to be sacrificed. They walked together in harmony and unity. Said Professor Kaplan, and we're all scribbling now, it sounds good. Said Professor Kaplan, this is the history of the Jewish people and the survival of the Jewish people. In the past, all generations walked together, father and son, grandparents and grandchildren. And then the Jews came to the United States, and the relationship changed. The older generation adhered to Jewish tradition. The younger generation split. They walked away. They did not walk together. And then said Professor Kaplan, now we have generations that are walking together, walking away from Judaism. The survival of Judaism is when generations, Vayelchu shnehem yachdav. All the rabbis, I can still remember, stood up and applauded. Every rabbi spoke on this theme on Rosh Hashanah. Every newspaper had the sermon of the rabbis, and they all seemed to be similar. I think Rabbi Kaplan had a point.
Ooh. That's very nice. So we got lots of things. I know that people have lots to say, and that's good because it was a great conversation. But we have to stop. So there's lots of wonderful. This particular story is so fruitful in terms of opening eyes to areas of Jewish life. We're going to have prayers now. We have lunch, and then Israel Rand speaking at 12:30. Have a great Shabbat. Take care. I know. The story.
Oh, yeah.
I'm good. How are the girls?
Everybody's good.
Everybody's well?
Yeah, we're going to Ohio to